okay, guys, I was hanging out on the couch with my wife last night before we watched the movie World War Z, and she was mentioning that, like, she's like, oh, that guy, because Piers Morgan's in the beginning of that movie, like, on the television screen, and she's like, oh, that guy just did like a conversation where he was like, oh, I could be a black lesbian, blah blah blah. So apparently, and then I was like, okay, I might as well look it up, and this is it's pretty recent, so let's see what we got here.
The author and commentator. Well, joining me now is the author and commentator Angelica Mallet, Talk TV's Esther Krakau, and Fox News contributor Tommy Lehrer. So, Tommy Lehrer, let me start with you. Two people in Britain today who've been at the forefront of not saying what a woman is. One is Nicola Sturgeon, the ex-First Minister of Scotland, who lost her job because of this ridiculous farce of a rapist self-identifying. She tweeted today, proud on International Women's Day to visit my old University of Glasgow, and banged on about women's rights. This is the woman who just literally lost her job for allowing a male rapist into a female prison. And Keir
Did they lose their job for letting a trans woman? Is it like a trans? I don't even know the context of it.
Starmer, who's leader of the opposition Labour Party here, was talking about protections for women in Parliament today, and yet he refuses to say what a woman is. Where are we with this? How has it come that leaders of parties in countries like the UK, and we see a lot of it in America as well, just won't say what a woman is?
Listen, I don't know about that person specifically, but most people, like, on the more progressive side, when they're like asked, hey, what is a woman? From like the trans perspective, like, the answer you're going to get is a woman is somebody who genuinely identifies as a woman, and does the best to express themselves as a woman to society based on that society's like concept of like the socially constructed idea of like what a woman is, like, you know, wearing dresses or longer hair or this, that, and the other thing. That's generally the answer that you're going to get. I know people feel like that's circular. I understand where you're coming from. But, you know, like the reason that it sounds like, oh, what is a woman? Oh, it's a woman, is because there's so many different characteristics from a societal perspective that are associated with being a woman. It's easier than being like, oh, somebody who, you know, might have longer hair or might have shorter hair, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the, you know, why they go through it with that perspective there. But obviously that's really not the place that you'd start. You'd start with like, why should we be affirming to trans people? And I think it's because it's in the DSM-5, and I don't think that makes anybody invalid just because something is registered in the DSM-5 or anything. You know, I think that just is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, we have a certain set of issues that we categorize in some capacity, so we can help treat people. And the best way to treat somebody that's trans is to help them get gender affirming care. And yeah, it's really not that deep. That's the best outcome for success based on all the information that we have. So.
Well, first of all, I have to apologize to you because all of this wokeness originates here in the United States of America, and then we export it to you in the UK.
Yes, you're to blame.
So we started this really in America. Yes, we are. You know, the wokeness starts here, and then it, of course, moves over, and now you guys have to deal with it. The world has to deal with it. But I say this, I'm proud to celebrate International Women's Day because I know what a woman is. So I would say, if you don't know what a woman is, you don't get to celebrate it. You don't get to pretend to be a feminist when it's helpful to you or helpful to your political narrative. You have to be able to define what a woman is. This is all a farce. They are seeking to...
I'll tell you one thing after listening to Tommy and Lauren. I think that what I would define a woman as is annoying. Holy fuck.
Race women, and this is the radical rainbow mafia, as I call it. This is not your average LGBT activist. This is the rainbow mafia section of that radical LGBTQ movement that has made women less than, and then has elevated all of this transgenderism and all of this pick your gender.
How does it make women less than? I really just don't understand that. Like, I understand from like sports, like if we let trans women in sports, especially ones who went through a male puberty, like it could end up, you know, you could end up displacing women, and I get that, but outside of that, like, how does it do anything? Like, I don't see, like, I have yet to hear somebody give me like an actual way that trans women hurt women. Like, I don't really get it. But
identify as potato, they have hijacked the women's rights movement,
LOL.
the feminist movement, and actual feminists should be really pissed off about it.
Well, as a feminist, I am.
But I thought conservatives said that there were no women's rights left to fight for. Like, they're already equal, you know, all that jazz. So, like, what are they hijacking?
I recently interviewed Angelica, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and I asked him this question, which seems to stump many other leaders. Here's a clip. What is a woman? We know that Nicola Sturgeon can't answer that. We know Keir Starmer can't answer that. You're the British Prime Minister. What is a woman?
Yeah, of course I know what a woman is. Adult human female.
Okay.
It's not difficult, is it, Angelica? I mean, that is what a woman is.
I mean, I don't know why you're obsessed with defining it. Like, what is a man? Like, why do we need these arbitrary...
A man is...
Well, we should have definitions for it. You should be able to answer the question when confronted. I answered it before. Whether you agree with it or not is fine, but I was able to answer before. Like, that's the problem, is if somebody asks you a basic question and you can't answer it, then like you're being a silly goose. You know, if somebody gives you pushback, that's fine, But then like respond to the pushback. Be like, okay, this is what a woman is. Oh, well, that's about, well, this, that, and the other thing. Like, for instance, if somebody might be like, well, I don't think that's what it is. Like, that sounds preposterous, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay. And then I'd say like, I'd bring up, this is what I always bring up. I'd be like, well, what do you think about like Blair White? Do you think they should use the woman's best bathroom? I'd be like, yeah, probably. It's like, okay. So then you kind of agree with me that like the way that somebody expresses for the most part is going to some extent going to dictate what bathroom they go into, right? You know, but just take on the pushback. You know, don't be lazy and just refuse to answer the question. It's silly goosery.
It's a male adult human, and that's it.
Right. Okay. I don't know that we need
these are just biological facts, but they're just facts. They're not arguable points.
Sure, that's what.
But I think we have a right to self-identify. And
As what?
If you'd like to be a woman, you can identify as a woman. I don't know why there is such an issue.
See, that's what I'm talking about. Like, if it's not if you'd like to be. Like, I don't like it when people say that. Like, it's not about whether you like it or not. Like, trans women aren't like saying they're women because they like it. They're saying it because they have like a severe amount of distress associated with the fact that like they were born a man. Like, it's not just, hey, I like doing this thing. It's like deeper than that. It's like it's an actual like diagnosed like issue. Like, it's something that's very distressing to that person, and that's why I respect it so deeply, because it's a legitimate struggle. It's not about just I would like to do a thing, and that I think is where people, you know, you lose people. Thank you for the 3 months medium. God, I lost my headphones recently, so I've been listening to your video streams out loud while I work. Love the progress content. Awesome. I'll try not to be too crass.
Degra super chatted $1.99. Have you heard about Silicon Valley Bank collapsing?
No, I'm sure that they're going to get a bailout. Hey, thank you so much for the small gut, Keenan G.
We've literally just seen a male rapist use that
Thank
scam
you.
to get himself put into a female prison where he could attack vulnerable women inside a female prison.
Well, that's true. That's
when even
obviously
his
terrible.
ex-wife said it was all a scam.
Which is a terrible.
If that is true, I mean, that's definitely terrible. That's not trans people's fault, though. That's that person's fault pretending to be trans, if that story is true the way that they're representing it. So that doesn't reflect poorly on trans people. That reflects poorly on people who are taking advantage of the distress that trans people go through to try to like get better treatment. So, yeah, which is why it's important as a progressive to make sure that you have like a firm stance on what it means to be a trans person, a trans woman, so that like we can create rules that would protect people from, or would prevent people from being able to dishonestly identify as a woman to hurt women, you know?
Very distressing, isolated incident, and I think it's easy to take that and say that means that no.
Yeah, adult female, a human female is a definition that fails to exclude. You think it fails to exclude trans women? I think that does exclude trans women, no, because like a female is technically like from a sex perspective a woman, or sorry, oh my god, like I'm having a like female tends to say. I just had a brain fart. Is like how you would define somebody from like a perspective of sex and not gender. So I think it still does exclude trans women. That's what they're trying to do at the very least.
No one can identify as a woman,
But
and
it's not an isolated incident, though.
But it's
42% of trans-identifying prisoners in prison are in there for sex crimes. There's actually an advantage, evidently, to identifying as a female, because they never.
Is that true?
In prison.
It's not an isolated incident, though. But it's
42% of trans-identifying prisoners
identify
So
as a woman.
what number she's saying?
But it's not an isolated incident, though.
But it's
42% of trans-identifying prisoners in prison are in there for sex crimes.
Is that true? Interesting. Let's see, this is a Swedish study. Oh, this is from 1973 to 2003. I mean, is that accurate to use now? Oh, sorry, my tab fell in. I don't. I would need for them to give me more information on that, but this is really dated from 2003. I'm looking more into it.
There's actually an advantage, evidently, to identifying as a female, because they never identify as male, because somehow male prisons seem less appealing to them. It's really weird. Anyway, but
Is it limitless, this self-identity?
It's not totally limitless.
What's the limit?
When you're talking about International Women's Day, I don't know why we take the conversation around International Women's Day and make it about this.
But if anyone,
there's so many benefits.
right, but if
to having
anyone,
a
according
day.
to you, can identify as a woman, anyone can, right?
I don't see a problem with
Just literally put their hand up and say I'm a woman.
Yeah, this is like the kind of person you don't want in your corner when you're talking about trans issues, because they're not very educated on them, it seems like.
But it's not an easy thing to do, to go out into
Actually,
the world.
it's
It's very easy.
Very easy.
You might think it's easy to say, but to decide to do that, to say
What
this
does
is
doing
who
it involve?
whatever that person decides, but to
Does
go
it
out
go
into
like
the world
makeup?
and say, I don't identify as perhaps the sex I
So
was
why
born
can't
as,
I
it's not-
identify? Okay, why can't I identify as a black lesbian?
So first of all, I think it's important to like understand that like we're talking about like a serious mental health like issue, and everybody goes through different mental health issues. Like we have particular prescriptions to help people get the help that they need. That's it. I have ADHD. You would prescribe me with that or diagnose me with that so I can get like, you know, whatever medication or potential education protocol that I might need if I was a younger person. And so like, you know, gender dysphoria is identified. It's in like the DSM-5, and it's just really exists there to give people the ability to get the treatment that they need, which is generally going to be gender affirming care depending on the individual. There's no like widespread or actual documentation of people actually being transracial in a way that is anywhere comparable to being transgender. There are like outliers like Nuka Zeus or whatever, but that's probably because men and women are drastically different, much more different than a black and a white guy. There's no real difference between black and white people, for instance, at all, other than like some people are louder at the movie theater. So I didn't say it. I'm just kidding. Whereas like men and women are like very different. And so like there's clearly something going on. My mic shut out. There's clearly something there's a phenomenon going on. There's like heavy documentation about it. There's people who are experts at these fields that review the data and show that the best way, generally speaking, to help people with gender dysphoria is to have them go through gender affirming care. Obviously very different. Also, one of the criteria is actually feeling that way and getting a diagnosis. So Piers wouldn't get the diagnosis because he very clearly doesn't actually identify as a black lesbian. The problem is like this woman is a little preposterous in her, you know, she's kind of a silly goose. So she doesn't answer these questions well. So I guess by her definition of like, you can just identify if you want to, like, yeah, I guess you would be able to do that. But I'm still trying to find this like 41% thing.
Well, firstly, I mean, it was.
I'm serious. If I can identify as anything without any.
All right, sorry, my thing was like going on a whack.
Why can't I on International Women's Day say I'm Piers Morgan, I'm a black lesbian?
I think taking it to a kind of absurd status.
I think that's
talking about quite a
with
strong
respect, I think that
change.
you'd already opened the absurdity door by saying it is limitless. You can do what you like. Anyone can say I'm a woman. So I simply ask you, why can't I?
I mean, this point kind of ridicules trans people to an extent.
Actually, I think what you said ridicules trans people, because actually people who go through the full process of transition, who actually go through what we used to call a sex change, which I don't think you can muck around with original biology, but those who actually go through surgical procedure over a number of years, I've got great respect for that very difficult journey they go on. I have zero respect for people who just wallop their hand up and go, suddenly, I'm a woman and I want all the rights that a woman has and I want to compete, say in sport, I'm a 6'4" athlete, sprinter, swimmer, whatever, who's competed very mediocrely in male sport, and I want to come in and crush women in swimming pools and in sprinting events and break all their records, perhaps irrevocably, just by saying, I'm a woman. I think that is the absurdity you were talking about. My response was to say, well, if it's limitless, why can't I then say whatever I want to say? And you say immediately, as I knew you would, well, that's ridiculous. But my point is, you were being ridiculous.
Well, that's your opinion. You can think I'm ridiculous, but I don't think you can say, well, it has to.
I don't know why I am, but you're not.
I don't think you have to say it's post-op is the only way that someone's allowed to identify.
Well, the original standard for the original
decide.
standard for being transgender was being diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which is a legitimate condition. And now it's being, however way you feel. So if you feel on Tuesday you're a woman and on Thursday you're a pizza, that's perfectly valid. But
yeah, generally speaking, I guess. Sure. Yeah.
to you,
I guess
that's
so.
ridiculous. And I want to know why that is ridiculous. We should be talking about actual women on International Women's Day. That's not crazy.
I mean, I agree.
I think it's fine to identify as like non-binary without like a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, but without that diagnosis, like obviously, you know, there's a deeper distress with your identity if you're somebody that's diagnosed with gender dysphoria. So,
But your idea of an actual woman.
can't find this
chromosomes,
40%.
She's an adult female.
can't
It's
find
not
it.
The
difficult.
chromosomes are a pretty good indication.
I don't think you have to be biologically female to identify.
Then
as a
you are
woman.
wrong. Because
Well, see, this is the problem: is that they're like, oh, I respect trans women that like have gender dysphoria, but like those people would be considered women. So like you say you have respect for them, but like you're still not really trans affirming. It sounds like you're kind of pretending you are. You're like, oh, I have a lot of respect for people that diagnose gender dysphoria, and then like, well, okay, they're women because they have the diagnosis. No, they're not. Okay, well then maybe you don't have the respect that you're saying that you do.
because
But
then I can
okay.
identify as a fox.
Yeah.
Well, no, you couldn't by this logic at all. But okay.
But again, it's
You
a bit
can.
of absurd point.
How many?
Like,
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Angelica. How many genders are there?
2.
There are 2 genders. Wow. So you don't believe in transgenders at all?
Well,
No. What? How does Piers get away with talking about a topic he has no fucking education on? What? I'm flabbergasted.
2.
There are 2 genders. Wow. So you don't believe in transgenders at all?
Okay. I'm so confused. Okay. So, first of all, a lot of people believe that there are 2 genders, even if there trans people exist, because trans people. I'm sorry, I'm a little thrown off because I'm flabbergasted by like this assertion, right? Most trans people are trans women or men, right? Biologically men who identify as women, and biological men or women that identify as men, and I think that's valid. But the fact that this person only thinks there's 2 genders is fine. It doesn't invalidate trans people. It invalidates non-binary people. Right? And I would say, like, sure, there could be a 3rd gender of non-binary, right? Like, that's fine. I mean, there's an intersex of the body, so why wouldn't there be able to be an intersex of the mind? There's different civilizations have had different, like, 3rd genders. Like, whatever, I'm fine with non-binary, I don't care. But even if you only think that there's 2, it doesn't invalidate trans people. So why would you even say that?
well, I think there are.
Whoa, hang on. Whoa. There are 2 genders?
Well, it's taught in.
Well, why do you say well? You've literally just launched this huge defense of transgenderism. Now you've eradicated it.
I think
No, you have what? No, you haven't.
If there are 2 genders, you mean male and female, right?
there's gender fluidity. I will.
Fluid between what?
Between what?
Between different identities, and we can choose different
You
identities.
see how difficult this is, though?
But it is difficult. But I think making.
But it's not difficult until you make it difficult. You see, the BBC has done teaching videos to 11 and 12-year-olds where they say there are 100 genders. One of them was astrogender, which is an affinity with the stars and the galaxy.
Yeah, that's obviously stupid. There's no such thing as astrogender. That's just like your way you feel a gender is like it's a direct call to like man, woman, or like some variation between some kind of like sliding scale, whatever. That's what non-binary is. But okay.
My response to that on the last show I did was to say, well, in that case, I identify as a 2-spirit penguin. I was then told I was being ridiculous, but I made the same point. The ridiculousness is the BBC teaching kids there are 100 genders. There aren't. It is absurd. Bring back Tommy Lehran, who I imagine is hyperventilating over there in America. Tommy, I mean, look, I don't see why, if it's limitless, I can't just say I'm Piers Morgan, I'm a black lesbian, because that is where limitless self-identity takes us. It means that male rapists can say they're women and get into female prisons. It means I can say I'm a 2-spirit penguin or a black lesbian, and why can't I?
Sure.
Because that is where it takes you.
It doesn't, but okay.
Well, it certainly does, and I think you just had the perfect argument there. It's impossible to define, and it's impossible to stand up for because it's a mockery of what actual people are. And furthermore, going back to children, when this happens at a young age, when you start...
I think I just have like the biggest problem with Piers is that he's just not an honest person and he's not particularly educated. Like, it's fine to be like, oh, I don't really get it. Like when people just identify without like a diagnosis, that's a fair thing to say. I get that. I understand that. I understand that a lot of people think that's regressive, but I can understand the train of thought that would get you there. But then when he'll pretend to be affirming of trans people with gender dysphoria, but then be like, no, they're still men basically if they're a trans woman. Like, it's just, I don't know. It doesn't come off as particularly like understanding of the topic that he's talking about.
Start trying to convince kids that they don't know what gender they are, or they're born in the wrong body at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
I don't think that there's like a widespread of people that are trying to convince kids that they were born in the wrong body. I think that, like, here's the thing. Trans people obviously exist. And hot take, those trans people have like felt trans since they were kids, right? And so they look at other people and they go, because that's true. There are such things like these trans adults. They were kids at one time and they were trans in some capacity. I think that, and so they're saying like, hey, I was trans when I was a kid. I wish I had more robust resources. And that's led us to have like a conversation about trans kids. Now, I think it can be a very tricky conversation to have because some kids might be just going through a phase. Some kids might be looking at social media and be identifying with it, whether it's for more attention or because they're maybe self-diagnosing in some capacity. There's a lot of different comorbidities with being trans, like depression and anxiety. And some people, like kids nowadays, are having that, and they might be like falsely diagnosing themselves. That's why you need to be very careful and make sure that they get the proper diagnosis, right? So because some of them might just not have gender dysphoria. And it's fair to be very skeptical and make sure that you're like doing it the right thing for when it comes to kids. And I agree with that. But I don't think that like there is a narrative that tries to suggest that trans people are like all groomers. And that is like a really big part of the conversation. And they try to make it seem like there's this intentionality to try to like do all these terrible things to kids when like most of the time that's just not the case. So
That's child abuse, all right? Gender-affirming care wherein you only tell somebody they can be whatever they want to be regardless of their biology at a young age, that is child abuse.
But I don't, so that's the thing too. I think that their interpretation of gender-affirming care is that they only affirms, but I don't think that that's true. It's not only affirming it's not only affirming things. I believe a therapist, because I've talked to a therapist that helps trans people before, and they talk about how it's like, oh, everybody gets like a different diagnosis based on like what they need. Some people have gender dysphoria, but their prescription of their solution is to not transition. Gender affirming care just means like giving them care that helps affirm them if that's the care they need. It doesn't mean to just like over affirm everything regardless. And so I think this is like this new thing that conservatives have been doing, where they play everything off as like overly affirming, when that's just not. I haven't seen anything. We should be careful not to over affirm, but I haven't seen like the case of where we're just like constantly over affirming. So
it's happening in the UK, it's happening in the US, and this is making room for groomers to groom young people, to confuse the heck out of them, make them not know what they are, so they can take advantage and exploit them. Now, I want to be very clear here. This is not the mainstream LGBTQ movement. There are a lot of conservatives that even support that movement. This is a radical agenda made by groomers, and they don't want you to call them groomers, which is a perfect example of why they are groomers.
Well, it's because it's not accurate to call them groomers, and it's like frankly just belittles what that word. Grooming is setting somebody up for sexual exploitation. If you're going to call LGBTQ people groomers because some of them knew they were trans from a kid and like they're just trying to help other trans kids, then call religion grooming, because it's all just conditioning. Like that's it. Everything is grooming now. If you bring a kid to church, you're grooming them. Like if this is by your definition, you're just grooming kids. Like so. Okay.
Is what we're doing is to confuse young people, to confuse all people, to make them dumber, make them confused as to what they are. It's a mockery of women's rights.
Shit.
It's a mockery of human rights, and we should no longer be having
and
the discussion.
And you end up with scandals like the Tavistock Clinic here in London, in the UK, where they were basically mutilating children, young kids, teenagers, mutilating their bodies irrevocably. And then it turned out, after it closed, after a scandalous report came out, that 97% of all the patients had other conditions, from autism to depression to other issues.
That's because there's comorbidities with being trans. I don't know exactly what they're referring to, but on just this specific point, just because somebody that's trans might
Jesus Christ super chatted $2. I'm hate farming right now. Get hate farmed, bozo.
Yeah, you're a groomer, Jesus. I'm just fucking. Anyway, I don't know about all the stuff that they're talking about. It's possible it's out of context. I don't even know what they're referring to. Let's just say that what they're saying is true. The fact that there might be like a comorbidity with being, doesn't invalidate this thing, right? We understand this. Like, hey, did you know that like this percentage of people that are trans also have depression? Yeah, that makes sense because it can be very depressing being trans, especially in a non-affirming society. Oh, did you know that my understanding is that there might be like a higher rate of people with autism identifying as trans. Okay. So, like, that doesn't mean that it's invalid. It just is an interesting factoid. Like, it doesn't make it invalid. Who cares? Like, that's not like a hot take. Oh, shit. Like, okay. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that people with particular mental health issues or physical health issues would have higher rates of depression. Like, what? Yeah, this guy, did you know that a lot of people in wheelchairs have higher rates of depression? So they don't really need the wheelchair. If we just cured their depression, they could walk again? Now, I imagine maybe them being in a wheelchair could be a little depressing because they are seeing people who are able to walk and they may not be able to. It's not that hot of a take. But okay.
Which may have been affecting their ability to think straight about what they wanted to be. And that was, to me, as a father of 4 kids, utterly horrific. Just horrific.
Utterly
horrific. This was going on. And
I love cows, by the way.
Anyone who tried to raise concerns about this, and journalists did, were immediately branded transphobic. And Esther, this comes back to what we see with people like J.K. Rowling, who's, I'm no friend of J.K. Rowling. She can't stand me. I don't like her, right? It's like fire and water. But on this issue, I've not seen a word she said that is transphobic. I've just heard her go, I want to support and protect women's rights. For that, she's been unbelievable.
Well, not for nothing, but like the way that you talk about this topic would be considered transphobic. So I don't think that you're exactly the best, most accurate person to interpret whether it is or isn't transphobic. But okay. From what I've seen, she's a little bit sussy. I'll try to remember to link a resource in the bio. But yeah, like she seems to, platform people who like legitimately don't believe that trans people are valid or should have rights. So yeah, okay.
Hounded, abused, attempts to cancel, which fortunately have backfired. But it's all wrong, this, isn't it?
The thing is,
I also
one
don't
of
care
the
about
shocking
J.K.
things
Rowling,
that she's
but-
been attacked for is for drawing attention to domestic violence and violence against women. And that's actually the biggest point here. Other than the fact that, that male rapist was allowed to go into a female prison in
What does that
Scotland,
mean?
there's a genuine danger around allowing men into women's spaces like women's shelters and things like that, and they can be there just by identifying as a woman and then identifying as a tree the next day.
Right, so
Yeah, true. Because then if they identify as a tree, they'll get free water, and we don't want that. Obviously, we should make sure that the diagnosis is accurate. I mean, okay. I don't know. That's just, to me, if this is really happening, which I'm not sure it is, we just need to make sure that we have a better understanding of trans people, so that people who aren't actually trans don't hurt trans people by pretending to be trans. Okay, if anything, the trans people are the victim here by having people fake their identity and make them look bad. Okay, most trans people, I would say all trans people really, just want to live peacefully, be left alone, okay? Potentially gross men that identify as women just to try to take advantage of the systems. That's not what trans people are. So, it's just kind of...
So, Angelica, do you understand that part of the argument?
I understand that kind of the argument, but I mean, like Tommy said, I don't think this is confusing for children. I think it's giving you freedom of expression and freedom of choice.
How many girls did you know? Like my wife was a bit of a tomboy when she was young, right? How many kids do you know, young girls in particular, who are tomboys? But if the wrong person gets hold of them and persuades them actually what you should start doing, mutilating your body and have a full attempt to become a boy, that's not what most tomboys end up wanting. They end up actually going through puberty, getting older, and then that's it. They become women. But if you get hold of these impressionable young minds too early, when they're just clowning around being tomboys, that's the danger to me.
I don't think the messaging is as extreme as you think it is, and I think we
Tavistock Clinic was pretty extreme.
I think we whip ourselves into a frenzy thinking these things, and this language that you mentioned at the start of the show, I don't think you hear that language used that often in everyday speech.
Which language?
And I think what you were saying.
Oh no, these are on NHS websites. No, this is where you're wrong. This is actually NHS websites in many cases. They genuinely call women chest feeders, birthing partners. They dare not say anything gender specific to women in case some trans people don't like it. To which I say,
the Tavistock Clinic. Okay. I know what he's talking. Okay, let me look into this.
Of women to be called what they want to be called. Why does all language have to be degendered for a tiny minority of people?
I think the problem is there's so much fear around having these kind of...
I just don't care. Who really cares about calling people chest feeders? I mean, I think it's weird and cringe. Just call them women or call them people with tits. Who fucking cares anymore? I feel like it's just not, it's a non-issue. It's that part is okay, yeah, it's weird, but who really cares? Are people actually offended by being called the person that bleeds instead of just a fucking woman? I don't think that everybody really cares. I think it's just forced outrage and boring.
Conversations and saying the wrong thing, getting it wrong. That means that people can't have conversations that feel kind of progressive about what is gender identity, what does the future look like, how do we create a compassionate space? So I think to your question at the start, what is women and why politicians wouldn't answer it, they're so scared of getting it wrong. And
people are scared because the mob come for them.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the mob needs to just go away and shut up. Anyway, I think scrap International Women's Day until we can all agree what a woman is.
No, I'm sorry. I think there's so many benefits to having International Women's Day. It'd be a real shame to do that.
Well, if you had your way, everyone would celebrate it by identifying as a woman, even if they weren't.
Well, being a woman.
Happy International Women's Day.
I feel like people like this should stop going on and doing interviews. Because this is the problem, is that you don't get honest conversations about these topics because every large media personality will find a not great pundit to pull on and say this, and this person clearly doesn't know how to fucking accurately represent LGBTQ people. Not that I would, but I feel like I would do exponentially better than this person. And so they find somebody who doesn't really know what the fuck they're talking about. They have it the right mind there. They're well intentioned, but they come in there and they ask really basic questions and they have no fucking idea how to answer the question. And then when they get any pushback, they're just it's you're not doing anybody a favor. It's a really dishonest scumfuck tactic from political organizations, and CNN does it too, Fox, everybody does it, but it's dishonest. It's not a real conversation. This person isn't equipped to tell me what I'm gonna have for lunch tomorrow, so it's unfortunate. Yeah.
If you had your way, everyone would celebrate it by identifying as a woman, even if they weren't.
Well, being a woman.
Happy International Women's Day. I am a woman. It's a farce. Anyway, Angelica, lovely to see you. Thank you very much. Esther, going to see you a bit later on. Tommy, always good to have you over at the pond. International Women's Day. There you are. A fine example of a genuine woman. Correct?
Thank you.
Yep. Sit there and smile and nod. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Identify as a woman. I am a woman, and that's how this thing works, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly. Thank you, Tommy Lehrer.
Okay.
I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.